Hello, everyone. This is Thomas Pepin, NHL Talk. I'm Thomas Pepin, and let's talk about the NHL. So, to start today, um, we're going to, or I should say, um, the we're continuing the NHL expansion series, having a look at uh, failed franchises if they could conceivably succeed in a second or third attempt, or new markets, and if they could succeed if the NHL decided to expand. And so, what we looked at yesterday was very quickly considering different markets, and in order to know which ones we're going to look at in more depth and which ones um, don't make the cut. And so, what we're going to talk about today are the ones that didn't make the cut, but could potentially work eventually. Now, that's when you're starting to get into, well, maybe there'd be like 40 teams in the league, but, we're still going to talk about a couple markets here because you never know. Things can change relatively quickly, and so they're not outside of the realm of possibilities. And so anyway, so we'll get to that. What I was going to start with was something I discovered yesterday, which I think does a good job of approximating what's required for a franchise to potentially succeed. And so, as long as I didn't screw up and as long as I'm remembering correctly, it's essentially a rule of three. So it's a multiple of three, however you want to word it. So, what that is, and again, I'm just going to, after I explain it, I'm going to go through and just double check that what I thought was the case is in fact the case. But essentially, if you take, because the Canadian and American markets, they're different. Canadian markets are very strong hockey markets, but financially, in terms of like population, or sorry, not population, for industry, like sales of, like I've said before, sales of luxury boxes, getting more fans into the arena and things like that. Canada kind of lags behind to some degree. So, but the fan bases are going to be stronger. Whereas with the U.S., you're going to have smaller fan bases because hockey's not quite as popular. Even in the most popular areas, it's not really all that strong in comparison to Canada. But there's a lot of potential for income from all the businesses and money that's in the States and the exchange rate and things like that. So when you take a look at everything all together, essentially what it is if you take a U.S. population, or, well, I think a better way to put it is you start with a Canadian version. So we know approximately the minimum market size in Canada to succeed as a franchise would be Winnipeg. There, in my opinion, and unfortunately because I'm a Jets fan, I think even they're kind of, not certain that they're going to succeed forever. But it seems like they'll be fine. I think they just barely squeaked in to be good enough to stay as a franchise. But anyways, you take the minimum amount that can succeed in Canada, you look at the population base surrounding that market. So essentially in Canada, we call them census metropolitan areas, and in the States, I think you guys have a couple names, but the one that I saw was metropolitan statistical areas. And so if you take Winnipeg's population for that region, multiply it by 3, then you get the smallest population that could conceivably support an NHL franchise. Now, there's a bit of wiggle room in there, so you need to. So another thing that I've been using is hockey registration as a proxy for fan base strength, however you want to put it, and so that's something you're going to want to consider. So, for example, Wisconsin is a smaller market, but there's more hockey in that market. Likewise for Michigan. Likewise for the most part, New York, Massachusetts, things like that. So I forget where I was coming from on that, but anyways, so yeah, you need to factor in how strong the fan base is as well, not just the population, but it's some sort of combination of the two. But really, again, this is not meant to be perfectly scientific. If you just take the population and either take the U.S. population divided by 3, it should be approximately equal to any number of the Canadian markets. And then if you're going the opposite direction, you multiply the smallest Canadian market by 3 to figure out an approximate minimum size for a U.S. market to succeed. So it seems approximately correct. That's the concept. We're just going to have a look at that briefly to start, just to confirm that that is in fact correct or close enough. And then that will help explain the reason why some of these teams didn't make the cut. So, yeah. So anyways, so we'll start there. And just a moment to get things pulled up. There we go. Okay, so the way I did this yesterday is we considered, because we started the stream considering Toronto, and if Toronto could support a second franchise, either in Toronto or in the surrounding area. And what I believe is the case. And so this is where, in fact, we did actually use hockey registrations as well. But anyways, yeah, so we were trying to figure out if it could support one team, and then it feels like, based on the data, that it could in fact support 2 teams. And so the thing is, though, is that it's a small population, but, well, compared to other markets, but the fan base is stronger. So that's where we played around with some numbers, and it seems like there's a multiple of 3 kind of across the board. So we'll just run through those numbers again just to confirm that that is the case. And we contrasted New York with Toronto because they're 2 very populous regions, 2 relatively strong hockey markets. New York to a lesser degree than Ontario, Canada, but similar in terms of, the type of, it's just big cities basically, and those are kind of the best comparisons. So for example, you can't really use LA because hockey's not as popular there. Chicago you could consider, but there's only 1 team in Chicago, so you don't know if a second team would work. New York does have multiple teams, and so on. Anyways, essentially you know that New York can support 3 teams, so then that will let you know, can Toronto support X number of teams. So anyways, so just to begin, so we know that all 3 of those New York teams are stable. So we've seen that their attendance is relatively stable. I mean, New Jersey's not, they're not at capacity all the time, but they haven't had a good team. But they've survived. Team valuation puts them at 15th. They're not going anywhere. They're a strong franchise. Consider the Islanders. They've been around for ages. Again, a lot of fluctuations. But the Islanders are the 10th highest valued team. They're not going anywhere. And then we all know about the Rangers. First, most valuable team, and they're nearly at capacity all the time. But the fact that they're not quite at capacity means that, it's not a perfect market. But it's clearly very good. So we know that New York New York region, so including New Jersey, can support 3 franchises. Buffalo, again, remember, it's in New York, but it's kind of very far away, very separate. So we're not really including it. So if you consider then that New York is stable, and then they have, based on the metropolitan statistical area stats, so the census says about 20 million is the population for that whole region. So that would be supporting all 3 teams essentially. And then when you go over to Toronto is 6.2 million. So it is slightly less than a third of New York. Now, let's just do the exact math here. It was this divided by this. Oh, well, actually it's the opposite, but so it's over 3 times, which means that it's slightly less than a third, but approximately a third. Now, you also consider hockey registration. So again, hockey registration is a proxy for fan base. New York State, where are you? So New York has a registration of 46,410. 46410. Whereas Southern Ontario uh, 175772. 175772. So the hockey registrations in New York State are slightly, well, a quarter, you could say, maybe about a third. New York State's registrations compared to Southern Ontario's registrations. So, and hi, Caleb. Nice to see you again. So, if they have a third of the registrations, but they have 3 times the population, we know that the Toronto Maple Leafs have they're at capacity all the time. So there's no doubt in my mind, at least, that it can support a second team in Toronto. The question is can it support a third? And so, yeah. So then, if you take so if 20,000 can support 20 million can support 3 teams, then and Toronto can support 1 team with a third of the population. And again, there's that multiple of 3. So if they have a third of the hockey registration in New York, but and that's the other thing I could have added in New Jersey's registrations. So it's essentially a third. So if there's a third of the registration, but 3 times the population, the Greater Toronto Area has a third of the population, but 3 times the hockey registrations. You could say that both markets, you just take, so one's got a multiple of 3, the other one's got a multiple of 3. They kind of cancel each other out, where in theory then, my argument is that the Toronto area can support 3 teams. So if New York can support 3, then Toronto should be able to support 3. That's basically the whole logic. Now, I know it's a bit maybe difficult to follow, but so essentially one's 3 times better in this way, another one's 3 times better in this way. If one can support 3, then therefore the other should be able to support 3 teams. That's my argument. Now, if you want to actually take this and apply it and see how that works, we can test it. So let's say we have, let's say we want to do apples to apples. So we have, we know New York can support 3 teams with their population. Now let's compare to another population and see how many teams it can support. So we know LA and Anaheim, this is another metropolitan statistical area, has 2 teams. Both teams are relatively stable and they should be fine. What is the ratio of the New York area to the LA area? Oh wait, I should do it the other way. It is approximately 2/3. What is 2/3? 2 of 3 teams. How many teams are in Los Angeles and Anaheim? 2 teams. So it lines up there. Chicago, they only have the the 1 team. Their AHL team is quite strong for attendance. You could argue that essentially equals the approximate ratio. Dallas, Fort Worth area, that's 7.6 million. 7.6 million divided by the 20.1 million, that's 1 team versus the 3 teams. Math adds up perfectly. Dallas is a strong team, it's fine. We figured out already with Houston. Houston's about the same size market as Dallas. In theory, it should be fine. Washington, it's about 1/3 of New York's population. It's a all things considered, a relatively strong hockey market. that team is perfectly fine. Let's just pull up the valuations just to... Capitals sit 11th value. And that kind of makes sense because the hockey market's pretty strong, all things considered. Local industry is quite good. Population base is suitable. Everything lines up. So far, every single case where we take this multiple thing, we know that it works. Philadelphia, Atlanta's a case where I would say doesn't work because we don't have the hockey registration. That doesn't line up. Miami, so that's the Panthers, not very strong. Hockey registration isn't that great, but they're still okay so far. Phoenix, we're starting to get to where Phoenix is quite noticeably less. So it's a quarter. So now, can Phoenix support a team? It's been an absolute struggle for ages for that area to support a team. So notice how it drops a little bit below a third and gets towards a quarter. That perfectly lines up where maybe you could say approximately at a quarter of the population, a team can't survive unless the market is very strong for a fan base. So I think it all adds up. Now, the other thing, the reverse way we can do this is, like I said, with Winnipeg, you can take their population for their region. So 834,000, man, that's not much. And it's barely borderline. Multiply that by 3. And then that gets you the smallest population for a U.S. market, but it has to be, all things considered, one of the stronger markets. So based on that, we go down to, well, we'll start from about here. Denver. It's above that. Of all places, it's, not one of the best markets, but it seems strong. Should be fine in the long run. St. Louis, not one of the strongest, should be fine in the long run. And hockey registration in both are reasonable. Charlotte, see, that's where you're getting close to the minimum. Hockey registration is not very high. It's not a very strong franchise. So they're ranked 27th. So this is where it starts to really show you that as you're getting smaller and as the fan base, using hockey registration as a proxy, if the fan base is small and the market's small, that's where you're struggling to have a team survive. So that's a good example of where we're starting to get a bit close. Where's another one here? Pittsburgh, strong hockey market. It's less than the baseline. It's doing fine. Las Vegas, less. There's a lot of people coming in and out. It's a more entertainment-centered place. It should be fine. Columbus, a hockey-mad market. They're fine. So this is, well, Nashville's another one of those ones that, man, it's borderline, but they've grown their registration enough that it's reasonable, and it seems to be okay. But as you can tell, valuation's one of the lower ones. So San Jose, as we saw, they seem to be a relatively strong market. California is not too bad, but it's very populous. So it kind of compensates for everything. So, anyways, so that's kind of as we go down, you can see that using the two different ways that you can kind of consider things. So you can consider the New York example as the how many teams you can fit in a market, and you can use the Winnipeg example as what's the minimum requirement to work in a US market. And then you can kind of use both at the same time, and it really more or less works. So if you take wait, give me a second here. I want to double check that I'm not messing that up. Yeah, so anyways, so basically if you take Winnipeg as a percentage of Toronto, oops. So this is where, like we were saying, Toronto could have 3 teams, maybe more, depending, because of the hockey registration. You could argue that it's more than that anyways. And so we know that Toronto can support 3 teams. What is that then? This divided by that is 7. So I don't know if that really works between the Canadian markets, because we're starting to get completely different animals. Toronto's a way different market than Winnipeg, I guess. But anyways, so I guess it can't really apply for Canadian markets. We kind of have to use Toronto as a baseline, I think, is best. But the smallest market we know that can support a team is Winnipeg, and but it's kind of borderline. So anyways, so basically what I just discovered is trying to do a ratio with the Canadian ones doesn't really work that well, but yeah. Okay, so as we've discovered, essentially that multiple of 3, ratio of 3, factor of 3, however you want to put it, works in a lot of different ways. So U.S. markets to U.S. markets, it's relatively similar. Winnipeg times 3 to get you the U.S. market. And that's where I was trying to do it. So we know that New York divided by 3 is Toronto. New York divided by 3 is the smallest market in the U.S. That can support a team. Winnipeg multiplied by 3 is the smallest. So it just doesn't work going Winnipeg to Toronto. Because then in theory, Toronto could support 7 teams, and I don't really think that's accurate. I think that's a bit of a stretch. And it's because we don't have enough industry in Canada. I think that's the difference point there. So anyways, so that's kind of the whole concept there. And using those filters, we can kind of go through all our options, which we did yesterday, and we figured out which teams made the cut and which ones didn't. And so today we're looking at the ones that didn't make the cut. So you would have seen, as I've already scanned through here, maybe some options that I was going to discuss. And if you saw yesterday's, you know them already. But we're going to have a look at those now. So I think I'll keep these open. And whoops, I want this. So the starting point here is should we go from smallest to biggest or biggest to smallest? We'll go from biggest to smallest, I guess. So Chicago, we've seen from the list 9.6 million is the population. We know that what was so approximate smallest market. Again, this is kind of, we've got two different ways to attack this in the States. The smallest market is somewhere between 3 times the population of Winnipeg, and if it's a strong hockey market, up to 1/3 of the New York market. So this is the high end. The low end was 2 point something million we had. 2.5 million. Yeah. So we know that Chicago can support one team for certain. Chicago's a relatively strong hockey market, but it's not one of the strongest. So Illinois, where is it here? So registration is 26,297. And we know that a third of the Canadian registration might be approximately a strong hockey market in the States. And so where was that here? So in this case, it's 6 times the amount. So you can do it the other way too. So it's less than a quarter. So the population is not quite there. So like we saw with New York, you'd want about 6.7 million to have a strong hockey market. And then if you need 2 of those, it's about 13.4, I guess, if my math is right. 13.4 million to support a second team. So Chicago, I mean, from hockey registration and total population, if you kind of consider both of those, it looks to be a bit short. So it's not bad. Chicago could conceivably support a second franchise at some point in the future, but it seems too distant in the future to consider them a good option for an expansion team soon. And then, so like I was saying, just to show that the market is in fact worth considering, the numbers, like we saw, they're all within range, kind of. But we've got the Chicago Wolves, and their attendance is one of the strongest in the AHL. So consistently at about 8,000 fans. and so they're towards the top. So, but they're not quite at the top. Anyways, long story short, it's a strong market. It's just clearly it's just not quite there. It's a bit lacking. So that's why Chicago doesn't make the list, but they're not far off. It seems very large population. That's where when we're contrasting it with the other ones here, LA Anaheim has 13.2 million. Chicago's not that far off at 9.6 million. LA and Anaheim is fine for two teams, but Chicago's not quite there to support a second team, it seems like. So, but it's an interesting thought because I've heard it before from somewhere. I forget where, that Chicago could maybe have a second team. But I don't think it's something that a lot of people talk about. But clearly, it's something that's not very far off from consideration, but it's not quite there. Next up is San Bernardino in California. So that region has about 4.6 million is the population. Now we know that the minimum has to be 2.5 million, but that's for a strong hockey market. Now California is not quite strong as a percentage of their population. So already there, I mean, it shows you that they're within range that it could happen. But if you also factor in where it's geographically, like its location, it is quite close to Los Angeles, Anaheim. Anaheim's not that strong of a hockey market, but it's not bad. LA is strong. And so if you have a not so strong market, a strong market, and the population's within range, you need to have probably a really strong registration base, again, as a proxy for fan base, in order for a team to work. And registration wise, California, where is it here? California's registration is approximately the same as Illinois, so 28,000 approximately hockey registrations. And yeah, as a percentage of the population, I mean, that's it's not very strong, because remember, there's already 3 teams in California. You've got the Kings, the Ducks, and the Sharks. So if they have 3 teams, it does tell you, going back to Chicago, that it's not that crazy for Chicago to maybe have another team, but it's not quite there, really. So because the registration's not so strong, it's close to Anaheim. Anaheim's not that strong. It doesn't seem to have enough there to be a suitable hockey market, as far as I'm concerned. That's what I would say. So that's my argument against them. But again, remember, the population's not so bad. 4.6 million. Seattle's got a team and they've got less population, but remember, it's a northern state, more hockey. So it kind of makes more sense that it would work. Minneapolis, less. That's a very strong hockey state. Actually, and that's maybe a good thing to compare to. So Minnesota. Minnesota has almost double the hockey registration and substantially lower population. So money-wise, it makes sense that San Bernardino could work, but fan base, not really. So local industry, I'm sure, could support it, but just there's not enough fans, and then it's not going to be a sustainable team at this point. So anyway, so that's my argument for that one. But it is a reasonable option, potentially. Sticking to California, there's San Diego. Now, this one's an interesting one. Now you're starting to get to a smaller population, but it's got a good location at least. So San Diego's starting to get a bit far from Anaheim and LA. Still a bit close. Problem is that it's south. It's way south, and that's where you're starting to get warm weather. Not going to be a strong hockey market. So hockey registration is probably quite low in the area. Population, as we saw, is starting to get towards the low end. So like we said, 2.5 million for a strong hockey market in the States is probably about right. But this is not a strong hockey market, and it's getting close to the same population. So where it's located is good, but yeah, fan base is probably not going to be that good. Industry is probably, reasonable, not good, not bad, but it's starting to get a bit low there. So so we know, as another example, so to contrast it with some that work, Denver's, I would argue, as if you would have seen the stream talking about Denver when they came back as the Avalanche, you'd know that I think it's one of the smallest that you'd want to get for not that strong of a hockey market. And so if they're kind of barely scraping by, they're not that strong of a hockey market. 22nd in valuation, so we're getting towards the bottom here. Which one was it here? That's it. So if Denver's kind of not that great, and it's about the same population, and there's way less again, registration as a proxy for fan base, if it's way less, it just really doesn't line up. What is it for Colorado? 15,000. It's over half the registrations of California. And again, remember, California has 3 teams already. So it just doesn't make sense, but it is relatively good for location, population. So again, it's one of those, like San Bernardino, it's not quite there, but it's not completely out of the realm of possibilities. So worth consideration, but not quite good enough. Next up, this one I think is quite interesting. Baltimore, Maryland. So let's pull it up on the map here. So one good thing about it is the region is relatively strong when it comes to hockey registration. So, where's Maryland? So 10,000 registrations, and it's not that populous of a state. Where is that other thing here? Where is it? Well, it's not that high on the list, but total registrations, it's up there. So, I mean, it's reasonable. Virginia has a lot of registrations, but that's kind of connected to Washington. They're all really close, these spots here. So it's a decently strong hockey market. There it is. So this is where we're starting to get a bit lower on the population side. So it's even lower than San Diego, but it's a stronger hockey market. So that kind of knocks it up a little bit. Remember, about 2.5 million population is good for a strong hockey market. But this is not a very strong hockey market. It's a reasonably strong hockey market. So it's like right there. It's within range of potentially working, but considering that Washington already has a team, Washington's very strong, so their attendance is at capacity all the time. Their valuation's 11th, so that shows that the market is pretty strong. It's got some room for maybe another team eventually, but remember, we've got Philadelphia not too far. And I mean, that's about it, really. So if they can support Washington very well, that's where you're starting to get into where maybe there could be a second team in the area. But because still, again, we're at a point here, what was the registration for, do they have DC separately? Give me a sec here. They do, yeah. But that's very small. I mean, DC's very small. So Maryland is about the same as Virginia. Virginia is basically around Washington. So if it's got the same registration, population's not quite there. So what was it for? So yeah, Washington, Arlington, Alexandria, that's the Washington Capitals market. And that's basically double the size. So Washington's strong enough definitely to support a team. Can it support a second team? Probably not. We already said that Chicago can't, so then Washington can't. But if Washington can safely support a team, and the markets are approximately the same, then Baltimore could, but it's half the population is the problem. So really that's where it's, like I said, it's right on the line, but it's not quite there. Doesn't seem like it'd be a good option, but it's not far off. So, so again, Baltimore's on the list of maybes, but it's not one of the best options. Next up, we have Orlando. So, Orlando geographically is great. What's the actual distance? Wait. I might have saved the wrong one. Oh, it's Jacksonville. So, excuse me. I thought Jacksonville was more than that. So, anyways, so Orlando, it's, I guess, maybe closer than I remembered it, but population, again, it's kind of within range. Florida is not that strong of a hockey market, so their registrations 18,000. They already have 2 teams. And then that's where, I mean, it's just because they have good populations for those markets. So Tampa's 3 million, and I mean, it's not that strong still. Their 20th valued team. And then Miami is 6.1 million. And they're the 31st. So it's a decent sized market. It's similar size to Tampa. So it's big enough in theory. But it seems just shy. So it's about 500,000 population less than Tampa. Tampa's not that strong of a hockey market, but it's not horrible. Miami is not very strong, and it's double the size, was it? Yeah, about double the size, a bit more than double the size. And so really, I mean, it's you're getting into kind of dangerous territory in terms of being able to sustain a team. So Orlando, again, I mean, it's kind of good geographically. I mean, it's a bit closer than I thought it was. I remember, I thought on a map it was further north. So to Tampa, it's it's less than 100 miles, so it's not quite good. In Orlando to Miami. See, that's enough distance. I thought either Tampa was further south or Orlando was further north. So probably shouldn't have even added it to the list. But it's not, again, it's not that bad of an option. The one sec here. Yeah, so the reason why it's on the list is if you see the ones that are starred in the description of the stream, it does have a basketball team there, which means that it's got an arena that is probably decently well suited to support a team. So it's not quite there on population, not quite there on fan base. Is there for an arena, and is not bad geographically, like where it's situated. So It's got a lot of the good characteristics, but it's just not quite there. Hi, Fishy Wishy. Thanks for tuning in again. So anyway, so Orlando, it's just not quite there. San Antonio, so this is another one similar kind of concept. So we know that, at least from my recommendation, that Houston should probably have a team. Now, if you consider San Antonio, that is, where is it? Oh, it's right down here. So it is 2.5 million versus 7 million. So it's not, the population's not that great. Now, geographically, again, it's far enough away from everything that it's a good location. Again, it's similar to what we said about with San Diego. It's a bit far south, but it's not a bad thing because we're trying to grow the sport, and getting into newer regions would be a good thing. So it's far enough away from Houston, far enough away from Dallas. So location-wise, it's great. Population, as we saw, not quite there, but not outside of the realm of possibilities. So it's in the range of Charlotte. So like the Hurricanes kind of thing. Similar to Las Vegas. Similar to St. Louis. So I mean, it's got it's close enough on population that it could work. And remember, the cutoff point's about 2.5 million, but that's for a relatively strong hockey market in the States. So it's really not, it's not quite there in a lot of ways. But again, it has an arena is the other thing that's good for it. So geographically great, arena great, population not quite there, fan base not quite there. But because it's a U.S. Location, in terms of local industry, it's probably relatively strong. So it's kind of not quite there, but it's a decent consideration. And yeah, so Fishy Wishy, what I'm talking about right now is, if you take a look at the title of, or wait, sorry, I think isn't it in the description? Anyways, so we're just talking about markets that could be an expansion team, but they're not quite there yet, basically, to simplify what I'm talking about. So it's the ones that didn't make the cut from yesterday when I was going through all the different options. So anyways, so for those reasons, San Antonio is not a bad option, but it's not quite there. Indianapolis is an interesting one. So that's in Indiana. The hockey registration for Indiana, where is it here? What is the abbreviation for Indiana? It's IN. Where was it then? Oh, there it is. Okay, so 6,500. So it's not very strong for hockey registration. It's not one of the worst, but it's not strong. Population-wise, it's around the same as Columbus. We know Columbus is strong, but it's a strong hockey market. Ohio. Where's Ohio? 16,000 versus Indiana was 6,000. So It's almost 3 times the amount, a bit more than double, and it can definitely support a team, but that difference there is a lot. So really, the hockey fan base in Indiana isn't all that strong, and so population wise, it's kind of close, but fan base probably not. Local industries probably reasonably good. The other thing that's in their favor is they have an arena as well for basketball, so uh, that works in their favor. Geographically, it's got a bit of space. I mean, it's not super close, super far. It's kind of right smack in the middle of that whole little area. So geographically, I'd say it's well situated. Closest place is probably Columbus, I guess. And like I said, if it can work in Columbus, I mean, and it's a hockey market, then, well, if the hockey market was strong enough in Indianapolis, then maybe it could work. But really, it's not that strong. So that's where you could argue that it's lacking. So again, same sort of thing. Lots of great characteristics. So arena, location geographically, population's close enough. It's just the fan base isn't going to be strong enough. And Columbus kind of just squeaked in. It's grown to be a strong franchise, but the fact that the fan, well, hockey registration, again, as a proxy for fan base, is not very strong in Indiana, I would say that it's not quite there. But again, it's right within range of being a potential option at some point. And then that's it for that one. The last U.S. one we're going to talk about is Portland, Oregon. So Portland is in a great spot geographically. So it's got lots of space from Seattle. There's nothing really there along the coast. To be honest, it's really the getting down into California. It's the only big place that you could consider a team along the coast. And I mean, it's in a region that you would think at some point eventually could be a decent hockey market, but it's not quite there. So if you take a look at the registration for Oregon, where is it here? See, it's only 2,600, so it's not very good. So potential fan base is probably not very strong. Population, it's right on target, 2.5 million. But that, again, remember, it has to be a relatively strong hockey market for that to work, and it's absolutely not. So geographically, it's great. Fan base doesn't look very strong. Population, good. So local industry is probably good. The last thing in their favor is they've got an arena as well. So Portland's got a basketball team. Should be well suited to support a hockey team. But for the other reasons that it's not strong, it makes it, right on the line, but not quite there. So Portland as well, close, but not quite in terms of being a good option for expansion. So that kind of covers all the ones we were going to speak of today. Now, I do also want to just briefly talk about Canadian markets. Now, we know that Winnipeg can support one team, but just barely. So really, you'd probably want slightly more population in order to support a team, and especially so if it's two teams in the same city. So I've already recommended that Quebec gets a team. Population's essentially the same as Winnipeg, but geographically, Quebec is in a great spot. So that one's already covered. Now we're getting into where could a market support two teams? So Edmonton, there was a thought of maybe Edmonton having a second team. It's not quite double, but if you take a look at their attendance, they're essentially at capacity all the time. So it's a very strong fan base, which indicates that there's enough interest where there could potentially be another team, but so their valuation's good, which means, again, could it support another team? Maybe. It's a strong market. I would say where it's lacking is just the fact that the population's not quite there. So 1.4 million, we know that Winnipeg is going to struggle to keep a franchise, at least short term, probably long run's going to be fine. So you probably want something like 2 million, maybe 1.8 million to support two teams. So that's where, even though Edmonton's quite close, it's not quite there. It just doesn't have enough population, and also local industry is not that strong in Canada. So I would say Edmonton is a thought, but it's not that good of an option. And really, the reason why these ones are all going to be done relatively quickly and at the end here is because the NHL wants to expand into new markets. To go into the same markets, it needs to be especially strong. And Edmonton is not so strong that it can support, or it probably could support a second team, but just not well enough where it's worthwhile from a strategic standpoint. And financially, it's probably just barely going to get by. So it just doesn't seem like a good idea for Edmonton. For the same reason, Calgary, Calgary's attendance near or at capacity all the time. So again, very strong. Population, the same basically as Edmonton. This is where we're starting to get to lower valuations. I mean, it's still strong itself, but to have a second team in the same market, it just doesn't seem strong enough. Again, considering local industry, it's not good enough. And strategically for the NHL to expand into new markets, not a good idea. Ottawa, we know their valuation is one of the lower ones. They do struggle to fill their rink. They're not horrible, but they're not good either. So look, like they've really dipped as of late. So, I mean, they had a good stretch, and for a while they've been decent, but lately not so good. So, Ottawa, again, same sort of story, just not quite there, not good enough to justify a second team. And then after that, we've got the other ones that are on the list of us evaluating, which is Vancouver and Montreal. So, so that's it for the Canadian teams and essentially for the full stream. So, so we know that there's a lot of decent options in the States for potential markets. So again, to recap, some of those were Chicago, San Bernardino, California, San Diego, California, Baltimore, Maryland, Orlando, San Antonio, Texas, Indianapolis, Indiana, and Portland, Oregon. So some good options maybe in the future, but just not quite there for various reasons. All the reasons that I've discussed, but they were all at least considered, and this kind of shows you some of the reasons why they weren't on the list of locations to evaluate in more depth. So anyways, so that's it for the stream for today. If you like the stream, hit the like button, share with your friends, subscribe, turn on notifications. Otherwise, channel homepage has upcoming streams. Should be 3 p.m. Eastern daily, except for Sundays. Any comments, leave them in the comments. Suggestions, same thing. And tomorrow, we're moving on to the rest of the potential markets for expansion, and we're going to move on to what we were going to do yesterday, but decided that it was we didn't have enough time because there was just too much. It took too long to have a look at which markets we were going to consider, and it just wouldn't have made sense because it would have been like a 5-hour stream. So tomorrow we're going to move on to Toronto as a market. I decided on splitting it between two different markets, Mississauga and Hamilton. Tomorrow's Mississauga. The following day is going to be Hamilton. So that's what's coming up. And so once again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.